The dim hum of the assembly chamber thrummed like a gathering storm, vibrations pulsing through the polished obsidian floors. Ambassador Elara Voss gripped the edge of her podium, her knuckles whitening against the cool metal. She was the only human here, representing a species still murmured about in galactic archives, resilient, adaptable, yet fragile in the eyes of the stars. Her dark hair pulled back tightly, her suit, a simple gray weave reinforced with nanofiber, felt heavier under 1,000 alien gazes. Across the vast circular hall, delegates from the coalition of worlds shifted in their seats. The Kreller insectoid traders with multifaceted eyes catching light in prismatic shards, chittered among themselves. Beside them sat the Vexery, towering bipeds with skin like weathered bark, their breaths slow and deliberate, exhaling faint mists of ionized air. At the center, elevated on a dais of swirling energy, loomed the Arbiter, a being of pure light and code, its form flickering like a hologram in the wind, neutral, eternal judge of all disputes. Elara cleared her throat, the sound swallowed by the chamber's acoustics. "Fellow delegates," she began, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach, "Earth's proposal stands. We offer our atmospheric processors, not as weapons but as tools to heal the scarred worlds left by the last war. In return we ask for access to the neutral zones, to mine the rare elements our colonies need to survive." A ripple of murmurs spread. The Kreller delegate, its mandibles clicking sharply, leaned forward. "Human tech? Volatile. Improving. Why trust the upstarts who barely tamed their own sun?" Elara met its gaze, forcing a calm she didn't feel. She'd prepared for this, hours poring over translations anticipating the barbs. "Because we've turned poison into breathable air on worlds you deemed lost. Test it. See for yourself." The Vexery delegate rumbled, a sound like grinding stones. "Risky. The last human experiment echoes still." She bit back a retort. The last experiment was a mining accident, spun into legend by those who feared humanity's rapid rise. No time for defensiveness now. The Arbiter's light pulsed once, signaling the floor open for rebuttals. But as the debate heated, a low tremor shook the chamber. Dust sifted from the ceiling, fine as ash. Elara steadied herself, glancing up. The walls, etched with glowing runes of ancient pacts, flickered erratically. "What's that?" she muttered to no one. The Kreller hissed, antennae twitching. "Seismic? No, this station is stable." The Vexery rose halfway, muscles coiling. "Not natural. Interference." Alarms blared suddenly, a piercing wail cutting through the din. Holographic displays across the room shattered into static, then reformed with urgent red script. "Containment breach. Core overload imminent." Panic erupted. Delegates surged from their seats, a chaos of limbs and cries. Elara's heart pounded as she scanned the exits, sealed, barriers shimmering into place. The Arbiter's form destabilized, its light fracturing into erratic sparks. "Evacuate protocols engaged," it intoned, voice glitching. "All non-essential functions suspended." Elara grabbed her comm device, fingers flying. "Engineering report. What's happening down there?" Static crackled back. No response. She wasn't alone in her desperation. The Kreller delegate scuttled to her side, its exoskeleton clacking. "Human, your kind built these systems. Fix it." "I didn't build the station," she snapped, but already her mind raced. The core powered everything, life support, shields, the very gravity holding them in orbit around Nexus Prime. If it failed. The Vexery Thorn lumbered over, his broad frame blocking the light. "We work together or we die divided. What do you know of the core?" Elara nodded, swallowing fear. Grit had gotten humanity this far, it would have to suffice now. It's a fusion matrix layered with quantum stabilizers. If it's overloading, we need to vent the excess or reroute power. But access is locked behind Arbiter clearance. ZYK's eyes gleamed. "Then we force it. Clever human, lead." As another tremor buckled the floor, sending chairs skidding, Elara dashed toward the central dais. The Arbiter hovered, dimming. "Protocol denies access." Silence, all voices. Her blood ran cold. Silence? The chamber's name wasn't just poetic, it was a vow, no violence, only words. But words wouldn't save them now. Elena gripped the edge of the console, her knuckles whitening against the cool metal. The chamber's hum had faded to a distant whisper, like the last breath of a dying star. Around her, the other counselors shifted uneasily in their seats, towering figures of iridescent scales and feathered crests, their eyes darting between the holographic display and the empty podium where Ambassador Hale had stood moments before. She could still see the echo of his words in her mind, the bold proposal for a unified defense grid, weaving human algorithms with the aliens' vast energy webs. It had been met with the usual chorus of skepticism, the Zethari delegates' mandibles clicking in derision. But now silence. Not the polite kind, but a void that pressed in from all sides as if the air itself had thickened. "Captain Reyes," murmured the ship's AI through her earpiece, its voice a steady anchor in the storm. "Vital signs stable, but neural activity is spiking. He's processing something." Elena nodded subtly, her gaze fixed on Hale. He stood frozen, mouth half open, eyes wide but unseeing. The translator implant at his temple pulsed faintly, a blue light flickering like a heartbeat. She'd seen this before in simulations, neural overload from incompatible frequencies, but never in the flesh, never with the fate of first contact hanging in the balance. The Krell ambassador leaned forward, its multifaceted eyes gleaming. "Human? Explain this." Pause. "Is this theater? A ploy for sympathy?" Murmurs rippled through the chamber, translations buzzing in Elena's implant like angry insects. She straightened, forcing calm into her voice. "Ambassador Hale is experiencing a temporary feedback loop. Our physiology adapts differently to your comms array. It's nothing more than..." A sharp crackle cut her off. The hologram flickered, Hale's frozen image dissolving into static. Alarms blared from the human shuttle docked outside, red lights pulsing through the viewport. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. Not now. Not here. She bolted from her seat, weaving through the aisle of hovering pods toward the exit. The counselors' voices rose in a cacophony, accusations, demands, but she tuned them out, her boots thudding against the resonant floor. "AI, seal the shuttle bay. Prep emergency protocols." "Affirmative," the AI replied. "But, Captain, the interference is galactic scale. It's not just Hale." Elena reached the hatch, palms slamming the override. It hissed open, revealing the corridor lined with curious aides, tentacled, chitinous, all staring. She pushed past, the weight of their expectations like chains. Hale's proposal wasn't just tech, it was humanity's bid for equality in this sprawling alliance. If it failed because of some glitch. The shuttle bay loomed ahead, its doors grinding shut behind her. Inside, Hale slumped against the bulkhead, sweat beading on his forehead. His lips moved soundlessly, forming words that wouldn't come. Elena knelt beside him, checking the vitals on her wrist display. "Talk to me, Ambassador. What's happening?" He met her eyes, frustration etching lines into his face. Gestured wildly at his throat, then tapped the implant. No words. Just a raw, desperate shake of his head. "Neural block," the AI confirmed softly. "The Zethari array is broadcasting a suppression wave, likely unintentional, but it's locking down vocal centers across compatible species. Humans are resilient, but not immune." Elena cursed under her breath. Resilient. That's what they always said. Grit your teeth, push through. But this was no frontier skirmish. This was diplomacy on a knife's edge. If Hale couldn't speak, the proposal died. And, with it, any chance of humans joining the core worlds. She hauled him to his feet, slinging his arm over her shoulder. "We improvise. Get you to medbay, flush the system. Then we figure out how to make them listen without words." Hale nodded, a spark of that old determination flashing in his eyes. As they staggered toward the shuttle's ramp, the chamber's distant clamor echoed down the hall, a storm building. Elena glanced back, the alien faces blurring into a wall of judgment. They thought humans fragile, impulsive. She'd show them grit. But deep down, a chill settled in her gut. The AI's warning lingered, galactic scale. If it was spreading, what if no one could speak at all? Captain Alara Voss gripped the edge of the podium, her knuckles whitening against the cool alloy surface. The chamber's vast dome arched overhead, etched with the sigils of 100 species, but now it felt like a tomb. The holographic displays flickered erratically, casting erratic shadows across the assembled delegates. Her words, bold, unyielding, had just echoed into the void. A proposal for shared resource allocation, humanity's first real stake in the galactic weave. But the response was nothing. No murmurs, no translations buzzing through earpieces, just the hum of life support systems and the distant thrum of the station's core. Beside her, Jax leaned in, his voice a low whisper laced with that trademark sarcasm. Well, that went about as well as a hull breach in vacuum. Think they heard the part about the water rights? He adjusted his collar, eyes scanning the tiers of seats where aliens sat frozen. Tentacled forms rigid, feathered crests drooping, crystalline bodies pulsing faintly. Jax's wit was his shield, always had been since their academy days, but even he couldn't mask the edge in his tone now. Elara shot him a glance, her jaw set. Brave didn't mean blind, she knew the risks of pushing the Veilari on this. Their empire controlled the Hydron belts, and humans were interlopers, scrappy colonists with ships cobbled from scrap and ingenuity. They heard, she murmured, forcing steadiness into her voice. The translators glitching. Or they're stalling. But doubt not at her. The air recyclers whispered cool drafts across her skin, carrying a metallic tang that hadn't been there before. From the lower dais, Ambassador Krethal of the Zorth Collective shifted, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the dimming lights. Cautious to a fault, Krethal had been their quiet ally, whispering warnings about Veilari pride. Now he extended a claw, signaling for calm, but his translator implant sputtered static. Human. Voss, he managed, the words fracturing like ice. The chamber detects anomaly. His form trembled slightly, the bioluminescent veins along his exoskeleton dimming. Anomaly. That word hung heavier than any accusation. Jack straightened, his hand instinctively hovering near the concealed comm device in his sleeve. Anomaly? Like what? Their egos finally imploding. But humor fell flat as a low vibration built in the floor, rippling up through Elara's boots. The delegates stirred at last, not in outrage but in confusion. A Veilari enforcer rose, its armored plates clinking, mandibles clicking in what might have been alarm. Alarms. That's what this felt like, the prelude to evacuation drills back on the colony ships. Elara's mind raced, piecing fragments. The proposal's core was simple: trade human tech for water access, easing the shortages strangling their outposts. But the Veilari had fixated on the ingenuity clause, humanity's demand for co-development rights. Had she overplayed? No time for regret. She tapped her own calm voice, urgent. Engineering status on the docking clamps. We might need to. Static cut her off, the link dead. Krethal lurched forward, clutching his throat as if words were being stolen. Silence field, he rasped, the phrase barely audible before his voice box failed entirely. The chamber plunged deeper into hush, gestures frantic now, hands waving, lights flashing in silent signals. Elara's heart pounded, the striking image of 1,000 mute forms etching into her memory, a symphony silenced mid-note. Jax pulled her back from the podium, eyes wide. This isn't stalling. It's sabotage. We need to move, now. Together they edged toward the exit ramp, weaving through the milling crowd, Elara's resolve hardening like forged steel. Whatever this was, humanity wouldn't fade quietly into the stars. Not on her watch. Captain Elara Voss gripped the edge of the console, her knuckles whitening against the humming metal. The bridge of the Endeavor felt smaller now, the air thick with the scent of overheating circuits and recycled oxygen. Outside the viewport, the nebula swirled in lazy violets and indigos, but it offered no comfort, only a reminder of how far they were from the chamber's sterile lights. Status on the relay? She asked, her voice steady despite the knot in her gut. Lieutenant Kai Ren, ever the cautious one, tapped furiously at his panel, his brow furrowed under the dim emergency glow. Partial link established, Captain. But the interference from the pulse is shredding the signal. We're getting fragments, mostly garbled commands from the Council fleet. He glanced up, his dark eyes reflecting the flickering screens. If we push harder, we risk a full blackout. Elara nodded, biting back the urge to snap. Kai's caution had saved them more than once, but time was a luxury they didn't have. The alien armada's weapon had already silenced half the galaxy's comms. One more surge and the chamber itself would go dark. Humanity's voice, amplified through their jury-rigged amplifiers, might be the only thing holding the fragile alliance together. "Risk it," she said finally. "We're not here to whisper." As Kai initiated the boost, the ship shuddered. Alarms blared in short, sharp bursts, cutting through the low hum of the engines. Elara braced against the vibration, her mind racing back to the chamber's last transmission. The Zyron delegate's frantic plea, undercut by static. "Humans, your ingenuity, it could bridge this void." She'd laughed then, a wry sound amid the tension. Now it felt like prophecy. The console lit up with a cascade of data streams, raw, unfiltered bursts from the Council's core. Elara leaned in, deciphering the chaos. Patterns emerged. The Armada ships weren't just disrupting signals. They were harvesting them, feeding on the electromagnetic echoes of 1,000 worlds. Clever bastards, she thought. But humans had built empires on turning the tide. Kai, isolate the harmonic frequency. If we modulate our output to mimic their harvest pattern, we can overload their collectors from the inside. He hesitated, fingers hovering. That could fry our own arrays. And if it backfires? It won't. Elara met his gaze, her tone firm but laced with that spark of camaraderie that had carried them through the wormhole storms. "Trust the grit, Lieutenant. We've got this." With a deep breath, Kai executed the command. The Endeavor groaned as power surged through its veins, the nebula outside flaring brighter in response. For a moment, silence reigned on the bridge, tense, electric. Then, a breakthrough, clear audio pierced the feed. "Endeavor, this is Ambassador Lyra. The chamber's holding but the Armada's closing. Your signal's our lifeline, keep it coming." Elara's lips curved in a grim smile. But as the transmission stabilized, a new alert flashed. The overload was working, but it was pulling too much from the ship's core. Shields dropping. Life support flickering. "Captain," Kai warned, his voice tight. "We're exposed now. One hit and we're done." She straightened, resolve hardening her features. The cost was mounting, but retreat wasn't in their blood. "Then we make every second count." Elara gripped the console edge, her knuckles whitening against the hum of the ship's failing engines. The void outside the viewport stretched like an endless black canvas, pierced only by the faint glint of debris from the shattered relay station. Beside her, Jax hunched over the diagnostic panel, his brow furrowed in that familiar mix of frustration and defiance. "It's not the core," he muttered, fingers dancing across the holographic keys. "The surge fried the comms array completely. We're blind and mute out here." She nodded, forcing her voice steady. Jax was the engineer, the one who saw problems as puzzles to smash apart, but even he couldn't hide the edge in his tone. Their small crew, just the three of them now after the ambush, had bet everything on this shortcut through the nebula veil. The aliens' blockade had closed in too fast, their sleek warships cutting off humanity's last supply line to the core worlds. If they didn't jury-rig a signal soon, the fleet would starve, and Earth's fragile alliance would crumble. Kale, the tentative alien ally from the Fringe Coalition, floated in from the corridor, his iridescent skin shifting hues in the dim light, nervous blue to wary green. He wasn't one of the purists who viewed humans as reckless upstarts. No, Kale had seen their grit firsthand during the evacuation of Orion Prime. "The Veil's interference is worsening," he said, his translated voice a soft chime. "Your plan to bounce the signal off the asteroid belt? It may not hold. My people's scanners show patrols converging." Elara shot Jax a glance. Their early idea had been simple. Use the debris field as a natural amplifier, slingshot a distress call to the nearest human outpost. But the first test had backfired spectacularly, the feedback loop sparking a secondary overload that knocked out their auxiliary power. Now, with the engine sputtering, they had one shot left before the ship became just another wreck in the nebula's graveyard. "Adapt or die," Jax growled, pulling up a schematic. He was the cautious one in his own way, always double-checking seals and tolerances, but pressure brought out his bold streak. "We repurposed the warp coil. Overloaded just enough to pulse a carrier wave. It'll burn out the coil, but it'll scream louder than any beacon. Kale's skin flickered to a deep amber. Doubt. Risky. The coil's integrity is at 47%. A pulse could tear the hull. Elara waited, her mind racing through the stakes. Back home, her family waited on a ration colony, counting on breakthroughs like this. Humanity wasn't the strongest in the stars, not with our clunky ships and stubborn ways, but we endured. We innovated when others fled. Do it, she decided, clapping Jax on the shoulder. Kale, you handle the stabilizers. Keep us from spinning into that debris cloud. As Jax dove into the wiring, sparks flying like angry fireflies, the ship groaned under another nebula eddy. Alarms blared, proximity alert. Elara peered at the scanner, 3 blips closing fast. The alien patrols. No time for second thoughts. The pulse built slowly, a low thrum vibrating through the deck plates. Jax wiped sweat from his eyes, his hands steady despite the heat. Charging, now. He slammed the override. The ship lurched, lights dimming to a bloody red. For a heartbeat, silence swallowed everything. Then the wave erupted, an invisible roar tearing through the void. Elara held her breath, watching the scanner for any sign it had pierced the interference. But the blips accelerated, not veering away. If anything, they homed in tighter. The plan hadn't failed entirely, it had drawn them straight to the source. Brace! Kale shouted as the first shots glanced off the shields, the impact rattling Elara's teeth. Jax cursed, scrambling to reroute what power remained. They weren't out of the nebula yet, and now the hunters knew exactly where to strike. Elena gripped the edge of the console, her knuckles whitening against the cold metal. The chamber's hum had faded to a whisper, the air thick with the scent of scorched circuits and alien incense. Outside the reinforced viewport, the nebula swirled like a predator's eye, its tendrils inching closer to the station's hull. She glanced at Tom, who was elbow-deep in a tangle of wires, his face smeared with grease, muttering curses under his breath. "Any luck?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. The alarms had quieted, but that only meant the fail-safes were holding, for now. The resource shortage hit hardest here. Power cells drained faster than they could recharge, and the alien delegates in the adjacent wing were starting to panic, their bioluminescent skins flickering erratically. Tom yanked the cable free, sparks dancing across his gloves. "Luck? This is jury-rigging a starship with chewing gum and prayers. The auxiliary feeds bypassed, but if that nebula pulse hits again, we're toast." He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow, his eyes sharp with that cautious which he relied on. "We need to vent the excess heat manually. From the outer ring. You know, the one exposed to vacuum." She nodded, already calculating the risks. The outer ring was a maze of service tunnels designed for drones, not humans. One wrong turn and you'd be floating debris. But the alternative? The chamber's silence wasn't just metaphorical anymore. The comms array was fried, cutting off humanity's voice to the galaxy. If they didn't fix it, the Council would assume abandonment, and the rival faction from the Orion arm would swoop in, claiming the sector as unopposed territory. "All right," Elena said, slinging a toolkit over her shoulder. "I'll go. You monitor from here." Tom's laugh was short, bitter. "Like hell. We're a team, remember? Besides, who else is gonna crack wise when you suit up wrong?" He grabbed his own harness, the camaraderie a thin shield against the dread coiling in her gut. They moved through the corridors, the station's lights flickering like dying stars. The delegate's wing echoed with muffled arguments, clicks and hums translating to pleas for evacuation. Elena ignored them, focusing on the hatch to the outer ring. It hissed open, revealing a void pierced by emergency strobes. The nebula's glow painted the walls in eerie purples, and she felt the pull of the vacuum, a silent promise of erasure. Clipping their tethers, they edged along the narrow ledge. Tom's breath came ragged over the suit comms. "Feels like walking a tightrope over hell, doesn't it?" A jolt rocked the station, the first tremor of the incoming pulse. Metal groaned beneath their boots. Elena reached the vent panel first, prying it open with a crowbar. Heat blasted out, singeing her visor. She worked fast, rerouting the lines, but the pulse intensified. Alarms blared in her helmet, structural integrity dropping. "Tom, it's not holding." "The seals?" A sharp crack split the air. The ledge buckled, Tom's tether snapping taut as he slid toward the edge. She lunged, grabbing his arm, her muscles screaming against the strain. For a heartbeat, they hung there, the nebula's maw yawning below. "Pull!" she grunted, hauling him back inch by inch. He scrambled up, gasping. "Plan B it is. Forget the vent. We improvise a shunt from the delegate's cryo unit. Risky, but it'll buy us time." Elena released him, her hands trembling. The chamber's silence pressed heavier now, a cost they couldn't afford to pay. As they retreated, the station shuddered again, and she wondered if humanity's voice would ever echo through these halls once more. Captain Elara Voss gripped the edge of the console, her knuckles whitening against the cold metal. The hum of the ship's engines vibrated through the deck, a steady reminder that they were still hurtling toward the nebula's edge. Beside her, Dr. Kai Ren hunched over his tablet, his fingers flying across the screen as lines of code scrolled like frantic insects. "The interference is worsening," he muttered, his voice tight with the caution that had kept him alive through a dozen expeditions. "If we don't reroute the power grid soon, the shields will buckle." Across the cramped bridge, Lieutenant Mira Thorne paced, her boots thudding softly against the grated floor. She was the brave one, the soldier who'd charged into asteroid fields without flinching, but even she glanced at the viewport where the nebula's swirling gases glowed an unnatural violet. "We can't just sit here," she said, stopping to lean against the navigation panel. "That alien probe is gaining on us. If they catch our trail, they'll know exactly where the colony is hidden." Elara nodded, her mind racing through the options they'd already exhausted. The plan had been simple at first. Slip through the nebula's dense clouds to mask their escape from the rival fleet, using the natural electromagnetic storms to scramble any pursuers. But the storms had intensified, turning their clever dodge into a deadly gamble. A power surge earlier had fried half their auxiliary systems, and now the core reactor was straining under the load. One wrong move, and the ship, along with the last data core holding humanity's survival blueprints, would be lost. "Try the secondary relays again," Elara ordered, her tone steady despite the knot in her stomach. Kai complied, but the console beeped a warning, red lights flashing across his display. The nebula's radiation was seeping through, corrupting the code faster than he could patch it. Mira cursed under her breath and slammed her fist on the panel. "It's no good. We're blind in here." The viewport filled with a burst of plasma, the ship shuddering as if struck by a giant's hand. Alarms wailed, and Elara braced herself, tasting the metallic tang of fear. This was it, the backfire they dreaded. The initial surge from rerouting power had amplified the nebula's interference, drawing the alien probe straight to them like a beacon. Shadows flickered on the sensors, 3 signatures closing fast. Kai looked up, his eyes wide behind his glasses. "Captain, we have maybe 10 minutes before they lock on. The colony's coordinates are in that core. If they take it..." Elara straightened, forcing her voice to cut through the chaos. "We fight smart, not hard. Mira, arm the decoys. Kai, isolate the core and prep the escape pod. We'll make them think we're going one way while we slip out another." Mira hesitated, her hand hovering over the weapon's controls. "And if they see through it? We're down to 1 pod, and the nebula's tearing us apart." "Then we adapt," Elara replied, meeting her gaze. "Humanity's always adapted. That's why we're still here." As Mira activated the decoys, small drones ejecting bursts of false energy signatures, Kai worked feverishly, his cautious nature yielding to urgency. The ship groaned, twisting through a pocket of ionized gas that lit the bridge in eerie blue. Elara watched the sensors, heart pounding. The probe veered toward the decoys, but the larger ships held course, their hulls gleaming like predators in the glow. A direct hit rocked them, sparks flying from a bulkhead. Mira shouted, "Shields at 30%. The air grew thick with the smell of burning circuits, and Elara's mind flashed to the chamber back on Earth. The last human council, where they'd voted to send this mission, voices rising in desperate unity before silence fell over the ruins. They couldn't fail now. Kai sealed the core into the pod, his hands trembling. "It's ready?" "But the nebula's pull..." "No time," Elara cut in. She hit the launch sequence, the pod rocketing out into the void amid a spray of chaff. The aliens' sensors lit up with confusion, their formations splintering as they chased the ghosts. For a moment, silence reigned on the bridge, broken only by the fading alarms. But the nebula's heart pulsed closer, a wall of fire waiting to consume them. Elara turned to her crew, resolve hardening her features. We bought time. Now we earn the rest. Captain Elara Voss gripped the console edge, her knuckles whitening against the flickering holograph. The alien chamber's hum had dulled to a whisper, like a beast catching its breath before the lunge. Beside her, Dr. Kai Ren hunched over his makeshift scanner, sweat beading on his brow despite the recycled air's chill. The silence field is contracting, he muttered, fingers dancing across the jury-rigged device. It's not just blocking comms, it's rewriting the neural pathways. If we don't sever the root node in the next hour, it'll spread beyond this ship. Lena, the engineer with grease-streaked arms and a perpetual scowl, slammed a panel shut. Your fancy theory won't mean squat if the engines don't hold. That pulse earlier fried half the relays. I'm patching with what we've got, but one more surge and we're space debris. Her voice carried the edge of someone who jury-rigged her way out of worse, but her eyes darted to the viewport, where the nebulous swirling gases mocked their isolation. Elara nodded, forcing calm into her tone. We stick to the plan. Kai maps the node, Lena reinforces the shields, I pilot us in close. No heroics, just precision. But inside, doubt not. The chamber, this ancient relic orbiting a dead star, had lured them with promises of first contact tech. Instead, it trapped them, muting every transmission, every cry for help. Humanity's voice snuffed in this void. As the ship shuddered forward, Kai's scanner beeped urgently. There, core chamber dead ahead. But the field's adapting, learning our patterns. Lena cursed under her breath, rerouting power with a hiss of sparks. Elara's hands steadied on the controls, the stars blurring into streaks. They were committed now, the silence pressing like an unseen hand on their throats. One wrong move, and the chamber would claim them whole, leaving Earth's beacons to echo unanswered forever. The dim glow of the auxiliary lights flickered across the chamber's vaulted ceiling, casting long shadows that danced like specters over the assembled delegates. Captain Elara Voss gripped the edge of the podium, her knuckles whitening against the cool metal. Beside her, Dr. Kai Ren hunched over a portable console, his fingers flying across the holographic interface, sweat beading on his forehead despite the recycled air's chill. The Xylarian ambassador, Thaler, stood a pace back, his iridescent scales rippling with unease, a rare tell for a species known for their stoic facades. We can't hold the signal much longer, Kai muttered, his voice a low rasp cutting through the hum of straining servers. The interference from the Vorath blockade was worsening, turning their desperate broadcast into a stuttering plea. Elara nodded, her jaw set. She'd led salvage teams through asteroid fields more treacherous than this diplomatic minefield, but nothing compared to staring down a galaxy united in fear. Thaler's multifaceted eyes darted to the viewport, where the Vorath armada loomed like a swarm of metallic locusts against the starfield. Your human tenacity is admirable, Captain, but the chamber votes soon. If they silence your warning, they won't, Elara interrupted, her tone steady as she straightened. She activated the override, flooding the chamber's comms with raw data streams. Schematics of the Vorath weapon, intercepted logs proving their intent to shatter the neutral zones. No speeches, just facts laid bare like a dissected engine. The delegates shifted in their seats, murmurs rising like a tide. But the Vorath representative, a hulking figure in armored exosuit, slammed a claw on his console. Lies from a primitive species. The humans provoke escalation. His words boomed, engineered to intimidate, and for a heartbeat the chamber teetered. Elara felt the weight of it, the risk of isolation, of humanity's fragile foothold in the Alliance crumbling under accusations. Kai's console beeped urgently. Signals breaking, rerouting through the secondary array. He patched in Thaler's personal relay, a gamble that exposed the ambassador's own networks. Thaler hesitated, then nodded once, his scales flashing a defiant blue. The feed stabilized, images of Vorath ships priming their disruptors now beaming directly to every delegate's implant. Elara stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. Look at the evidence. Not our words, your eyes. A few heads turned, then more, the tide shifting as the data wormed its way past defenses. The Vorith delegate snarled, but his bluster faltered as a Krell envoy raised a tentacle in query, demanding verification. Outside, the Armada's lead ship pulsed with energy, a warning shot grazing the station's shields. The chamber shuddered, lights dimming further. Ilara exchanged a glance with Kai. They'd bought time, but the vote loomed, and one wrong move could doom them all. Thaler placed a clawed hand on her shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes in its simplicity. For the first time since the crisis began, hope flickered amid the tension, fragile as the failing lights. Ilara gripped the console edge, her knuckles whitening as the ship's alarms blared in staccato bursts. The void outside the viewport twisted with debris, shards of the alien megastructure glinting like shattered obsidian against the nebula's glow. Beside her, Jax hunched over the flickering holographic display, his fingers dancing across the controls with the frantic precision of a surgeon mid-operation. The integrity field's holding, but barely, he muttered, sweat beading on his brow. One more pulse from that core and we're vapor. Captain Reyes stood at the center of the bridge, her posture unyielding despite the tremor in the deck plating. She was the anchor, the one who'd pulled them through the initial breach when the chamber's defenses activated without warning. Now, with the artifact's energy surging wildly, she scanned the readouts. Options, people. We can't outrun this feedback loop. Her voice cut through the din, steady but laced with the grit of someone who'd stared down worse. Mira, the xenolinguist, knelt by the comms panel, her earpiece crackling with fragmented transmissions from the away team trapped inside the chamber. They're alive, but the silence field is amplifying. It's not just blocking sound, it's rewriting neural pathways. If we don't sever the link soon, it'll spread to the ship. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the translator matrix, eyes darting to the viewport where the massive structure loomed, its spires pulsing with an otherworldly light. Jax slammed a fist on the console. My jury-rigged dampener bought us minutes, not hours. We need to vent the excess energy or it'll fry the whole system. He glanced at Reyes, his usual cocky grin absent, replaced by the raw determination that had kept him alive through a dozen Black Ops runs. The plan they'd cobbled together in the heat of evacuation, using the ship's auxiliary thrusters to redirect the surge, had backfired spectacularly, drawing the chamber's ire like a magnet. Reyes nodded, her mind racing through contingencies. The chamber, that ancient relic buried in the nebula's heart, had promised answers to the galaxy's oldest riddle: why the precursors vanished. Instead, it unleashed this curse, a silence that started as a whisper in the mind and ended in eternal muteness. Humanity's delegation had been first to breach it, their voices the initial sacrifice. Now, with the away team, scientists and diplomats, stranded within, the stakes clawed higher. Lose them, and Earth lost its voice in the stars forever. Prepare for manual override, Reyes ordered, strapping into the pilot's chair. Ilara moved to assist, her cautious nature yielding to the urgency. She'd always been the one to double-check seals and run sims, but now hesitation meant death. Together, they initiated the sequence, the ship groaning as maneuvering jets fired in precise bursts. Inside the chamber, Dr. Harlan clawed at the walls, his throat raw from unheard screams. The silence wasn't empty, it pressed, a weight that muffled thoughts as much as words. Beside him, Ambassador Lena knelt by the central pedestal, her fingers tracing the glowing runes that had activated the trap. We triggered it, she signed frantically with the emergency gloves, her face pale but resolute. The artifact reads intent. Our questions, they were too loud. Harlan nodded, his brave facade cracking as another wave hit, visions of forgotten worlds flashing in his mind. The team had come for unity, to bridge human grit with alien legacies. Instead, the chamber demanded sacrifice, stripping away the one tool that defined them, speech. But in the quiet, something stirred, patterns emerging from the runes, a puzzle begging human ingenuity. Back on the bridge, Myra's eyes widened. Wait, the transmissions. They're modulating. It's not random, it's a code. She patched it through, and faint harmonics filled the air, syncing with the ship's hum. Jax leaned in, his wits surfacing like a lifeline. That's our frequency. They're bouncing it back, trying to guide the search. He recalibrated on the fly, weaving the signal into the dampener. The alarm stuttered, then steadied. Reyes gripped the yoke, the ship bucking as she aligned with the chamber's core. Hold on. We're going in. The viewport filled with the structure's maw, energy arcing like lightning. Ilara's breath hitched, but she locked the stabilizers, her steady hands the difference between collision and precision. As they dove, the silence field clawed at the hull, but the team's ingenuity pushed back, a human symphony of code and grit, voices reborn in silence. Yet the cost lingered. One wrong pulse, and the chamber would claim them all, humanity's last words echoing into nothing. Ilara's fingers trembled as she adjusted the makeshift amplifier, its coils humming faintly against the dim glow of the chamber's emergency lights. The air was thick with the scent of scorched wiring and alien incense, remnants of the council's hasty evacuation. Beside her, Jax knelt, his broad shoulders hunched over the console, sweat beading on his forehead as he rerouted power from the failing life support. "This has to work," he muttered, voice rough from hours of shouting orders. "If we don't boost the signal now, the fleet's relay dies with us." Across the room, Kale, the cautious engineer from the outer colonies, paced with measured steps, his eyes flicking between the flickering holograph and the sealed doors. He was the one who'd spotted the flaw in the initial plan, the crystalline interference from the nebula that had scrambled their comms in the first place. "The adaptation's risky," he said, not looking up. "One surge too much and we fry the whole array. But yeah, it's our shot." His words carried the weight of someone who'd lost friends to bolder gambles, yet here he was, trusting the human grit that had gotten them this far. The chamber shuddered again, a deep groan echoing from the hull as another asteroid fragment grazed the shields. Outside, the void churned with debris from the shattered relay station, a graveyard of twisted metal drifting in the nebula's purple haze. Ilara remembered the council's final transmission, the alien delegates' voices rising in panic before silence swallowed everything. Humanity's plea for aid had been their last words, clear, unyielding, demanding the galaxy recognize the threat. Now, with the chamber sealed and the air recyclers wheezing, that silence pressed in like a physical force. Jax slammed a panel shut, the clang sharp in the tense quiet. "Power stable. Ilara, sync it up." She nodded, her brave facade cracking just enough to reveal the fear beneath. Fear for the billions back home, unaware their envoys were fighting to restore the link that could save them from isolation. Her hands moved with practiced speed, weaving the human-coded algorithms into the alien tech. It was ingenuity born of desperation, repurposing the council's ornate signaling crystals as amplifiers, turning their rigid harmony into a chaotic burst of human frequency modulation. Kale stopped pacing, leaning in as the first test pulse fired. The console lit up, lines of data scrolling in a frenzy. Interference dropping, 40% clear. But then the readings spiked, a red warning flashing as feedback looped through the system. The chamber's lights dimmed, and a low whine built in the walls. "Pull back." Jax barked, grabbing Ilara's arm. She yanked the lever, but not before a jolt arced across the console, singeing her sleeve and sending sparks dancing like fireflies in the gloom. They froze, breaths held as the whine peaked and faded. The holograph stabilized, projecting a weak but steady beam into the nebula. Faint replies crackled through, garbled voices from the distant fleet, coordinates aligning. It wasn't perfect. The signal would degrade in hours, forcing a risky rendezvous. But it was enough. Humanity's voice, fractured but fierce, pierced the silence once more. Ilara slumped against the wall, the burn on her arm throbbing in rhythm with her pulse. Jax clapped Kale on the back, a weary grin breaking through. "We did it. But look at this mess." The chamber's core was compromised now, life support rerouted meant they'd limp back on auxiliary power, one wrong hit from blackout. The cost lingered in the acrid smoke and the scar on her skin, a reminder that triumph in the void always exacted its toll. As the first clear message beamed out, calling the fleet to converge, Ilara wondered if the galaxy would ever hear them the same way again. Ilara's fingers trembled as she sealed the final conduit, the faint hum of the chamber's core vibrating through her gloves. The air was thick with the scent of scorched metal and recycled oxygen, a reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. She glanced at Jax, his face smeared with grease, eyes locked on the flickering console. "It's holding," he said, voice rough but steady. "Barely." Behind them, Mira slumped against the bulkhead, clutching her side where the shrapnel had grazed her during the breach. Her breaths came in shallow bursts, but she managed a nod. "The signal's amplifying. If this works, they'll hear us across the void." The chamber they'd fought to reclaim was a relic of humanity's first interstellar push, a nexus point buried in the asteroid's heart, designed to broadcast our existence to the stars. But the Krell had turned it against them, their bioengineered swarm twisting the frequencies into a silence that swallowed voices whole. Planets fell quiet one by one. Earth, Mars, the outposts. Humanity's chorus reduced to echoes. Elara, Jax, and Mira were the last responders, a ragtag team of engineers and survivors pieced together from the debris of failed evacuations. It started with the whispers. At first, the galaxy thought it was a solar flare interference, a glitch in the comms nets. But then the silence deepened. Ships went dark mid-transmission, crews vanishing into static. The Krell, those ancient, inscrutable machines from the outer rim, didn't conquer with weapons. They unraveled the threads of connection. No more pleas for help, no rallying cries, just void. Elara had been on Titan when it hit her colony. One moment her team's chatter filled the hab. The next, mouths moved but no sound escaped. Panic set in as they clawed at consoles, only to find the signals looping back on themselves, trapped. Jax pulled her from the wreckage of that first assault, his quick hands rerouting power while Mira sniped the drone swarm from the shadows. They'd linked up by chance, 3 sparks in the growing dark, driven by the stubborn human need to shout back. Now in this chamber the stakes pressed like the asteroid's unyielding stone. The Krell's core pulse was rising again, a rhythmic throb that made the walls shiver. If they couldn't override it, the silence would spread, erasing the last human words forever. Elara's plan had been simple: hack the Nexus, flood it with raw, unfiltered human noise, recordings of laughter, songs, arguments, the messy symphony of life. But the first attempt backfired spectacularly. The Krell adapted, turning their broadcast into a weapon that fried half the auxiliary systems and left Mira bleeding. Jax wiped sweat from his brow, his cautious nature warring with the fire in his eyes. "We adapt or we die quiet. Push it now, Elara." She did. Her hands flew over the interface, weaving the fragmented audio files into the Nexus stream. Mira dragged herself closer, plugging in the salvaged modulator from her pack. "Include this," she rasped, handing over a cracked datapad. It held her own recording, a defiant poem she'd scrawled in the hab's dim light, words of grit and unbreakable will. The chamber fell silent for a heartbeat, the core's hum fading to nothing. Then it roared back, not as suppression but amplification. Voices erupted from the speakers. Children's giggles from old Earth vids, pilots' banter over crackling lines, lovers' whispers snatched from forgotten logs. Humanity's cacophony, raw and unpolished, surged outward. But the Krell fought. Alarms blared as tendrils of their code snaked through the system, trying to clamp down. Jax slammed a fist on the override, his witty deflection forgotten in the moment. "Come on, you bastards, listen to this." Elara felt the pull, a psychic weight as if the silence clawed at her throat. She forced the words out anyway, speaking into the mic. "We're here. We laugh. We fight. We endure." Mira joined, her voice weak but fierce, reciting her poem line by line. Jax hummed an old spacer tune, off-key but full of heart. The Nexus trembled, lights strobing as the two forces collided. Sparks flew from the panels and a crack split the floor. Myra's wound reopened, blood staining the deck. But the signal broke through. Elara saw it on the readouts, the silence fracturing, human voices piercing the galaxy like stars reigniting. The Krell's pulse stuttered, then withdrew, retreating into whatever digital abyss birthed it. The chamber stabilized, the hum softening to a steady purr. Jax exhaled, slumping beside Mira. "We did it. They're hearing us." Elara stared at the console, the broadcast icon glowing green. Out there, across the black, humanity's remnants would catch the wave, colonies stirring, ships calling back. But victory carried its scars. Myra's injury needed medbay attention they couldn't guarantee, and the nexus was fragile, one more hit from collapse. The silence had taken too much already, voices returned but the lost were gone. As the first responses trickled in, faint pings from distant relays, Ilara allowed herself a small smile. The chamber no longer echoed empty. Humanity spoke again, ragged and real, a testament to grit that no void could fully claim. But, in the quiet moments between transmissions, she wondered what words they'd choose next, and if the stars would listen without judgment.